Thurston County Board of Health special meeting and work session. It's Thursday, August 19th, 2021, 10:33 a.m. My name is Ty Menser, Chair of the Board of Health. The Vice Chair, Commissioner Carolina Mejia, and Commissioner Gary Edwards are both participating on our Zoom platform, as well as our environmental health staff and our Director of Public Health and Social Services, Shelley Slaughter. We have an hour and a half this morning to follow up on a series of discussions we've had over the last many months related to on-site sewage management plan. And we may have some input from our from Paula Cracknell, and if she arrives, I will potentially interrupt the meeting or find a spot for her information to slot in. But at this point, I guess we'll just turn it straight to Art or Shelley. Is that the plan? Pass the baton to Art?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Welcome, Art.
Okay, good morning. And as you mentioned, I'm Art Starry. I'm the Environmental Health Division Director for Thurston County Public Health and Social Services. And we're here to commemorate Commissioner Mejia's 5th septic system briefing. 5 already. And here with me today is Shelley Slaughter, our director, and Jane Mountjoy-Venning, who is the supervisor of our water quality and septic system monitoring and maintenance program, and Steve Peterson, who's our program manager for our on-site program, land use, water supply, and part-time incident commander, and all sorts of other things that go on that Steve gets to do. And so we're here again to talk about septic systems and monitoring and maintenance, and trying to provide some options for the board to consider based on the previous discussions that we've had. So I will try to share my screen here, and my hand works. There we go. So hopefully that's working.
Yeah, let me double check. Commissioner Edwards, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the septic system management plan briefing, and we'll go from here. So we're back. If I was really clever, I could have made this the 5th edition or something, but I'm not that smart. So just wanted to talk about, again, where we left off last time, I think, and mostly try to go into discussing some options and some recommendations or some things that we thought you might want to consider based on the feedback that we've heard previously, and some of the community comments from community members and other things that might allow us to move forward if you choose to have us do more or something a little bit different on our on-site program and implement the plan. So and feel free to interrupt whenever you want, and Jane and Steve will be helping as we go along, but I'll probably do most of the talking since I think I did most of the tinkering with the slides here. So today we want to talk about some different approaches and what they might look like, and some the benefits they might provide. Talk a bit about a recommendation, which is based a lot on pick things, but also has some other elements in it, and see how, use an example, kind of a real world example of how that might apply, and how we might be able to address some community concerns and things that we had a program like the one we'll describe here in a bit. So the first thing that we're going to talk a bit about is just how we might, if we wanted to go ahead and develop a program that focuses primarily on education and outreach, what that might look like. And these are a lot of the concepts we've talked about previously. But the idea would be to try to make sure that everybody within the county, whether they're in Henderson Inlet or out on the west side or by Summit Lake or Lawrence Lake or in the rural county, they would all have information on on what's necessary to monitor and maintain their septic systems. As we've talked about before, we focus our efforts primarily in Henderson and Nisqually, and also on septic systems that have renewable operational certificates. But we also, as we go into special areas, for instance, we have a focus area like we did on Eld Inlet, we've done that. But the vast majority of folks do not receive regular reminders on what's necessary to monitor and maintain their systems. So what we would propose to do is, or this program would do, is make sure that we're doing that. We would also do something called Septic Sense workshops across the county. They've been very well received. They're quite successful, but they tend to be done when we can get grant funds. So they've been sporadic, and during COVID, we didn't do much of anything on those. We would also like to be able to have, if we have this program, allow owners of less complex systems to be able to do their own inspections. I think we've talked about before, in Henderson and Nisqually, we have classes that are enormously successful, where people who have a renewable operational certificate, if they have one of the less complex systems like a gravity or a pressure distribution system or something called a Glendon, and there might be a couple of others, they're allowed to take a class. It's about a 5-hour class, although we've come up with a video version of that isn't quite as time intensive, that allows them to learn how to maintain their systems, and then they can do that. And they can turn in the inspection reports rather than having to hire someone to do that. And again, that's something that was developed actually as a community recommendation when those programs were developed. And we've had more than 3,000 people attend those classes. Jane may know the exact number, but it's a lot, and enormously successful. This would also make sure that we would have resources to provide training to communities and groups upon request. As part of this, we would also increase our capacity to follow up on monitoring reports that are turned in by septic system professionals. As we mentioned in the previous briefing, there's a high number, about 8.5% of those that have significant problems, and about 17% overall that have some sort of problem. So we'd be able to follow up on those and get back to people and do more quality assurance work on that to make sure that our certified professionals are doing the work that they're paid to do. Periodically, we hear about complaints and we try to follow up on them, but we don't have right now a routine program to evaluate their performance. And then to work, I mentioned that we're doing some different things during the COVID times to try to provide training for people. What we'd like to be able to do is expand that and do a little bit better job. So that's what this approach would have. Now, again, there's some pluses and minuses to this, but that's one of the concerns that we've heard and we hear periodically from people, and has come up in our discussions, is that we're not treating everybody the same way. And there's a thought that, again, if we did a better job with education and outreach, we'd move the needle some as far as increasing the percentage of on-site systems that have current inspections. And as we've talked about before, once you get outside of the ones that have required renewable permits or certificates, the numbers drop from about 90% down to the upper 30s. So that's one idea, or one approach, or a package. And kind of what we're doing is, if you wanted to think of it as a restaurant menu, I was trying to think of a clever way to make a menu slide, but I wasn't able to do it. These are kind of the a la carte options, and then we'll have kind of a combination for you here in a little bit. I don't see anybody laughing, but I'm trying.
Under our masks, we're laughing.
Okay. So shoreline on-site systems, and we've had a lot of discussion about this and how in the case of our Henderson and Nisqually programs really focus on shoreline on-site systems, and it's been a successful program. And we've had past discussions about how, the septic systems that cause the biggest problems when they fail are the ones along the shoreline or near the shoreline, particularly those near recreational areas or where we have shellfish harvesting or other things. We've had instances where septic systems have caused illnesses in our county and in Mason County. We have problems where one septic system, because it was seeping into, this is one example or more, was seeping into stormwater facilities. It managed to close the shellfish harvesting area in Nisqually for a few years until we could figure it out and work with the property owner to get it repaired. And that one was particularly messy because we had to go to court, we had to do all sorts of legal stuff to get it done. But we were successful in the end. But this program would, again, require renewable operational certificates. So again, that's where we not only send reminders, but we have a more stringent legal requirement for people to monitor and maintain their systems. And so we would find out what kind of system they have, make sure we customize their recommendations or requirements based on that system type. And they would need to inspect it and pump it as need be. Inspect it frequently, as require, and pump it and maintain it as necessary. So the idea here is, because it would take a tremendous amount of resources to do, all the shorelines in the county. We would, the way we put budget of this would be to have staff so we could start sequentially picking areas. So we would work to identify the most highest priority areas and work on those and develop that program, at least for the shoreline area, based similar to what we do in Henderson and Nisqually. Again, it'll be focusing on the shorelines, not all the upland properties. And then work that area, notify people, get things going, and then go on to the next area. And so that would just build over time, and we would make progress, and eventually get closer to getting all the shoreline systems in a system where they can be tracked, and we can do a better job of doing education and outreach and follow up. Depending upon the area, we would do dye traces. That tends to be in areas where you have higher banks or drainages. Lowland properties, not so much, but we would dye trace them initially and then follow up on that. Right now, the Henderson Nisqually model, that's every 6 to 9 years, migrating towards 9 years. And this would allow us to identify failing on-site systems and make sure that they get repaired promptly. We would hope to be able to provide incentives like riser rebates and loans and to encourage monitoring and maintenance. That's been a successful element of our different programs when we can offer it. There's some limitations on using public monies for riser rebates and things like that. So we typically have to get grants, or in the old days, we would get funding from the conservation district because their funding could be allowed for activities like that, or services like that. But anyways, we would try to do that to get and provide incentives because people have told us that's important, and also make sure that we can continue to participate in the loan program, that CRAFT 3 system that allows people to get low interest loans to repair their systems. That's been very successful. And then continue to, this is a repeat item, but provide the advanced training so that all the on-site owners who have the less complex systems, again, they're so complex, you really do need to be a professional who's received a lot of training to maintain them properly. But for the ones that aren't quite so complex, we would have training so that people can monitor their systems and be certified to maintain them. By certified, our code requires that people who do monitoring and maintenance and turn in records to us need to be certified. So this would allow them to be certified to maintain their systems. And there's also some things where they can do other family members and things like that. If say there's an older parent and the son wants to become certified to maintain their system, we allow them to do that. Is that correct, Jane? Yay. So that's a kind of a quick synopsis of that program. Any questions so far? We'll move ahead then. Pollution identification and correction. And so we've talked a bit about this, and it's something that it has been proven successful. We're doing it in a couple of areas as resources allow, typically as grant resources allow. And other counties have done this as a way of identifying the source of pollution that impairs water quality, and then being able to work then with property owners and do further investigations to again, find the exact source of what it is and then make sure that it's corrected. And so, again, what this allows you to do, especially if you make sure that you're testing and evaluating the right parameters, is you can try to identify the pollution source, whatever it is, whether it's a septic system or animal keeping practices, or maybe some stormwater thing or some unknown pipe that's who knows what it is. It would allow us to do that and then respond to the problems. And an example like that you're sort of familiar with from hearing from community members is Black Lake, where they've said there's some issues here. We would like to be able to have someone evaluate those. There'd be kind of two components to it. At least the way we would see it is you would have, and the way other counties have done this, is that you would have the ability to survey high priority areas on a rotating basis. So in addition to having, say, the septic system programs in Henderson and in Nisqually, we might be able to monitor certain streams on a priority basis, although we're doing that. But you could pick other areas as well, or shoreline areas where you're particularly concerned, or maybe you're not able to anyways, you could pick those and rotate through them, and that's a model that Kitsap County and some others have done with some success. And then it also gives you the ability to conduct investigations or follow up on problems. So imagine that water quality monitoring that the State Department of Health is doing in, Eld Inlet finds that one marine station is now impaired and it's likely to result, it might be leading to a shellfish closure, which would require us to put in the county to implement more severe control measures. We could start following up on that and hopefully be able to identify the problem and perhaps get it corrected before water quality becomes so impaired that there's a shellfish downgrade, which would trigger in requirements in state law that, again, typically takes quite a bit of effort to address. And so that's and those downgrades, for instance, are what led to the formation of the Henderson and Nisqually programs. So that you'd be able to conduct, or we would be able to conduct special investigations, and then also identify areas where maybe more significant follow-up is required. So imagine if we did go into a community and find out that there's lots of problems with septic systems, that might might give the board sufficient reason to say we need to have a special program within that area. That's the current one isn't sufficient. We need to be able to do more. It might lead to who knows what would happen. But anyways, that's the way these things could work out. And so that would be an approach to that. So those are the kind of the key elements of the kind of three major menu items that we came up with. Hopefully that's making sense. I can't figure out how to get where I can see all you people right on my screen. So far, so good?
So far, so good. I see Paul is here. Is this a good breaking point for me to?
This might be a good idea, good place for a break, because I was going to go into the combo thing. So this is as good a time as any, I think, if Paula wants to talk.
So, Paula, thanks for being here. And as you remember, you made some passing reference on Friday about some new issues related to septic, and I wanted the board to hear that in this context of this discussion, not really that discussion, which was more about finances of Lake Management District. So you may have other things on your plate today, so I'd just like you to have a chance to report on what you were making reference to, and then the board can ask questions, and then we can let you get along the rest of your day. But you're welcome to stay, of course, but go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Menser. So what I was referring to is there's a modeling project that Kevin Hansen is working on where he's looking at different scenarios of nitrogen from septic systems around lakes. And it's a particular area of importance because a lot of the lakes in Thurston County don't have a lot of inlet or outlet activity. So a lot of what goes in there just kind of stays there for a longer period of time than in lake systems where we have constant inflow or outflow. So looking at the data that he has collected, it looks as though we have a problem around lakes, and in particular around Pattison, Long Lake, and also some areas such as Hoffett Lake. So what I'm gathering from the meeting here today, and sorry I'm here late, I just got the invite, everybody, is having a priority on inspections around lake systems as well. I know that we have a push to have the OSS program running for manual or required inspections on the Henderson and Nisqually watershed, but I would like to propose that is increased to people who live around lakes as well. So that's what I would like to say about this. And I would also like to suggest, I don't know if the commissioners have had a chance to see some of this data that Kevin has modeled, the hydrologist, but it indicates that there's a problem that we need to address.
Okay, can you say any more about the model that you're referring to? I know what I've seen from Kevin, and Art will know this because I think he was there too, was the sort of some looking at groundwater and concentration of septic. I think you were looking at like Tanglewild or somewhere around there where it was sort of looking at that, but it wasn't focused on lakes. Is this based on like counting the number of septics around a particular lake and modeling, or is it based on like water, more, is it theoretical or is it more like tangible based on actual water quality sampling, or what exactly is he using to, Jane, I see, is that, I can barely see squares, so I apologize. Jane, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, so Kevin has been working on or increasing the fine tuning, I guess, of the groundwater modeling capacity that we have. And we have a grant that's upcoming. We're just waiting for the contract to get finalized through Department of Health to do an intensive study around the Tri-Lakes area of Pattison, Long, and Hicks Lake to further look at this situation where it does appear that there's a density of septics. If you overlay the known areas of high nitrogen, they overlap quite a bit. So what we'll be doing is he'll be looking at the flow, the groundwater flow that we know pretty well, and identifying locations to then go and sample particular wells and then test what we see in the modeling against what we see in real life to fine tune that and see, kind of get us from that theoretical to what's really happening and be able to then better adjust the model to match what's happening on the ground to calibrate that model. So that's a project that we'll be doing this coming winter and into next year.
And then I guess tying Paula's comment to Art's slide about the shoreline. So Art, would it be, when you say on your shoreline slide 5, start in the highest priority areas and sequentially add more, would that, I'm trying to see if these things dovetail, would a high priority area then be the lakefronts because of what Paula said about the lack of inflow and outflow, rather than, obviously every shoreline in Thurston County has a lot of properties, but would a lake-focused program be sensible in that, given kind of those comments from Paula and I guess Kevin?
You're muted there.
I guess, is that what you're contemplating when you presented the overview of the shoreline piece? Is like, you didn't mention lakes in particular, but I'm wondering, you did say start in highest priority areas and sequentially add more. So maybe you were thinking lakes. So that's my question. I don't know what you were thinking when you said that, or what the highest priority areas might be.
Art, you're muted. Art, you're muted.
Is he frozen?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Me. Anyways, so the on-site management plan identified the 2 areas as being kind of the first consideration, although it did mention some of the lakes, but it identified Eld Inlet and Summit Lake. And Summit Lake, as we talked about before, even nutrition, as far as nutrients and things, is in good shape. However, because it's a drinking water lake, that was the reason for the concerns there. But then the way this would work, and it kind of comes down to how much capacity you have, but then we would look at other things. So is Long Lake warranted? Is it Pattison? Is it whatever? Now that, again, that would be, yeah, so that's the way it would go. We haven't gone to the point of laying out, the top 6 areas that if you wanted to have more shoreline capacity, which ones they would be. But it could focus on, it would focus on, again, them sequentially.
Okay.
And
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Then I got county manager. Go ahead, Jane.
I was going to say, we did ask our folks at Geodata and our and Joel to look at that data, and we would be adding, for the number of parcels that have septic systems that are by lakes, and immediately adjacent is about 1,673. If you go back 200 feet, that's another total of 3,332 more systems. So again, the more you add, the more staffing it takes to be able to manage the intensity of reviewing the reports that come in and following up. So it's a matter of resource.
That number of lakes, systems, Jane, 4,000 something, that's about Lake Nisqually. Nisqually's got 4,000 or so septic systems in it.
Okay, county manager had something.
So I just want to clarify that it is, at least in my mind, at the last briefing, there was a number of 4,428 on-site septic systems. They were near the marine shorelines, lake shores, and streams. So what I'm hearing is the 4,428 number provided in the past briefing does not encompass all the lakes. Is that what I'm hearing?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear, Ramiro.
Okay, at the last briefing, you provided a number of 4,428 on-site septic systems. And the description of that number was that all those properties there have near the marine shorelines, lake shores, and streams. So what I'm hearing is the 4,428 number does not include all the lakes. Is that what I'm hearing?
So were you going to say something, Jane?
Well, go ahead.
I can go ahead. I probably have that slide here somewhere. Is that it? No, sorry. There we go. Was that the slide? So when we were looking at stuff, so there's, the county streams, the proposed streams. So they were indicating, again, with this first cut that we had, that near the lakes within 200 feet, there's 3,300, and then there's the marine. So actually there's about, according to this, there's about 5,000 something, but then we would also have to back out the ones from Henderson and Nisqually, which are down here. So it's closer to being, at least with this data set, there's probably about 5,000 systems that would be added if we decided to look at marine and lakes. And then if you say, this is all streams according to the shoreline management program. So whether this would be something we would want to look at or not, I don't know. I mean, some of the bigger tributaries like Woodland Creek or Perry Creek or something, if we decided that big tributaries were important, then you would add some of those. We don't have a breakdown of that number.
I'm going to go around, while we're at this point, I'm going to go around the horn commissioners. Commissioner Edwards, questions for Paula?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I do have a couple of questions. As we move forward on analyzing water quality issues, the one thing that we always seem to miss is lawn fertilizer, because I know of 2 studies now with Black Lake where the community paid for the studies, and they found out that it was not septics along the lakes, but it was other things. And sometimes those other things are like the stream issue coming in is one of them. And lawn fertilizer is a big piece of the nutrients going into the lake. So if you can't tell the difference between lawn fertilizer and septics always get a bum rap, and lawn fertilizer is usually the contributing factor on the nitrogen level. So I'd like to make sure that we use some kind of a comparison where we're not necessarily measuring that nitrogen in the lake itself, because that could be contaminated through the lawn fertilizer process. And I think there's a way to do that. I know there was down on Scatter Creek, not on the creek itself, but in that area, there was quite a development that was put in. And prior to that, it was a farm. And now the nitrogen level in the water is less than it was when it was a farm. And it's, I don't know, might be 100 homes or something in there. I'm not sure the number, but I just think we can't look at any one thing without a comparison. That's kind of where I want, because I want all of the facts, not just some of the facts. And then maybe a quick question for Art. One of the Black Lake study that was done by the community identified that there was some problems coming from some of the streams. But what's the difference in our ability to look at that problem compared to what's that camping club that we have the big problem with over? I think it's in one of the watersheds flowing into the
Dobbs
Art,
Creek.
you know what? Dobbs Creek.
Dobbs Creek.
Yep.
Yeah, the Dobbs Creek issue. I guess I'm wondering why, when a problem is brought to our attention, like those creeks or the three identifying creeks flowing in the Black Lake, somebody brought it to our attention that Dobbs Creek was a problem, and we're working on that and have been for years. So when somebody brings us an issue like, hey, there's a problem here with this stream going into Black Lake, why is it we can't get on that? Did we designate specific money to the Dobbs Creek issue? So I'm just trying to get a handle. I want to get all the facts as we move forward. That's my main concern.
Okay.
So could you give me an answer to that, Art? On
Sure.
the
So I
Dobbs
can tell
Creek
you.
thing?
On the pollution stuff, that the point you raise is a good one, and it tends up to be one of the bigger challenges when you're doing this sort of work, is making sure that you have the right tools to identify the source of pollution. And if it's nitrogen, as you've indicated, there's lots of things that contribute nitrogen. And so if you're trying to look at nutrient balance, you need to figure out how to identify what the true source is. So like you've said, in urbanized areas, fertilizer can be a big problem. It can be a problem for both nitrogen and phosphorus, depending upon what your water body is and what the limiting nutrients are and how active people are fertilizing. But like you also said, nitrogen can come from on-site systems. It can come from animal keeping practices. And so you have to design your study the right way to try to identify those. And in the case of nutrients on lakes and things like that, when fertilizer is the problem, the solution is to try to work with people to manage their properties a little bit differently. Maybe not so green a lawn is okay. So that's a problem. And if you look at, and if you're doing pollution identification and correction stuff, there are other things you can test for in addition to fecal coliform or nutrients to help identify the sources. You might recall that.
What's his name? Craig. I hope that works out.
Commissioner, can you mute your phone there?
And speaking of Craig,
Okay. But there are things, so there are, you might recall people at the Black Lake study talking about how the consultant used optical brighteners and other things to try to relate what they were finding to, is it humans or is it something else? So there's techniques you can use to help identify that. There's some DNA stuff that people can do if there's a real question about, is it, people or something else? So those are methods you can use. The reason that the Dobbs Creek stuff, you may recall, we started hearing of that problem years ago, and that led us to apply for grants. And that's how we're focusing so much attention on Dobbs Creek right now, is because we were starting to see water quality problems. The Department of Ecology had done a study that identified problems on Dobbs Creek and also another little creek nearby. We were able to obtain grants, but the problem is it took years to get the grants, and now we're using those grant funds to work with the community to try to fix their septic system problem. So that's why we're able to do that there. The reason we can't jump right on Black Lake is because, frankly, we don't have the resources right now. Our staff we're actually in the process of trying to hire staff. Where the resources we have now are fairly categorical, meaning that they're for particular purposes. And there's an example here that we'll try to show that talks about to do a study to be careful enough and take the time to make sure that we can find the right source of pollution. it takes quite a bit of time. There's a slide that's coming up that I added to this set that talk about the steps involved with doing a pollution identification program in a community. So those are the reasons. And I could go on more, but I don't. I know we don't have an unlimited amount of time.
So,
Okay, thank you, Art.
Art, just on the lawn fertilizer question, the Black Lake issue was fecal coliform, which is not connected to lawn fertilizer. Is that correct?
The concerns that they brought forward are 3 streams, and they are concerned about human contamination. And the reason, there's some nutrient issues, but the reason I believe they brought those forward was because the consultant identified that the pollutants were likely from humans. They did some special testing to figure that out. So that the people I saw, at least, that came and testified to you were talking about concerns about public health and swimming and things like that.
But just to clarify, if it's fecal coliform, it's not lawn fertilizer. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, correct. It was E. coli bacteria.
But commercial fertilizer would not have fecal coliform or E. coli bacteria. If it was manure that some people were applying as a fertilizer, well, then that could be another issue. But commercial lawn fertilizer, you won't get bacteria from that.
Commissioner Mejia is up.
So going back to the cost of it, the 533, I'll just go with $500,000. So with that figure, I understand why, at first to get everything to be compliant, there would be like this big push of outreach. But I feel like once the wheels are turning, I don't see why that would be a per year case.
So you're talking about for the pollution identification costs? Again, the intent here would be that it keeps going. There's quite a bit of shoreline areas. There's a lot of streams. If we were to look at the list of streams that show water quality problems, we were to say go through the TMDL study that was done that's close to being finalized for the Deschutes. As we look at other things that come up, and who knows what the future will bring, we anticipate that there'll be a need for this for quite a long time. So that's why it's an ongoing cost. And so say pick Black Lake as an example. If we followed up on the Black Lake ones and did some other things, well, then next it might be another stream. There'll probably be another Dobbs Creek or something. We could follow up on that. But certainly, if after the initial startup and everything was going so well that we ran out of things to do, then we could certainly reduce that.
So Art, I would like to, at this juncture, have you run through the rest of your prepared presentation, and then we'll have another round of comments and discussion. So go ahead and plow forward with your
Okay, well, go ahead then. And so here's what we thought we heard. We were listening to the different meetings and things, and so the recommendation that we came up with tries to address a lot of these things, or I think it does in some fashion. So correct issues identified in on-site reports. So that's been one thing that people have brought up, and it's concerning to us too. There's some things on some of those that are scary, and we aren't being able to follow up on them as well as we would like. Try to figure out some way to increase the number of on-site systems with current inspections. Work to find, assure that failing shoreline and other high-risk systems are identified and repaired. We'd like to figure out we've heard that we want to do a better job of informing on-site owners on-site sewage system owners how to monitor and maintain their systems. And so wherever they are in the county, they should at least get some basic information. We should also, if we can, find a way to encourage desired behavior, provide incentives, and that's been successful in some other areas, and other counties have done that. So there's that would be something in a perfect world we would try to do. Respond to reports and studies that identify problems. So, Black Lake, Dobbs Creek. Right now, we're also working on Green Cove Creek, where there have been issues. So be able to work on those and try to get to them fairly quickly. Commissioner Edwards anticipated your comment there. Identify the true source of pollution. So septic systems aren't the only problem. There can be other areas we have to make sure we do the right thing, so we aren't asking someone to do investigations or make repairs that aren't warranted. Don't want to paint with too broad a brush when we're doing this work. We need to be careful. We want to be fair and equitable. That keeps coming up. We hear from people a lot that our programs focus on some people and other people don't get any attention. That doesn't seem quite right, or that maybe we're giving some people a special benefit that they should also get. So there's a question about that. And try to develop a program the public understands and supports. I think at different times we've talked about, I've heard, at least I recall the commissioner saying, we don't want to have a big uproar. If we can come up with a program that's effective and the public can support it and understand it, that would be desirable. So that's what we think we heard. So the recommended program has a couple of key elements to it, and Jane came up with the nice, clever titles here. So pollution prevention elements. So what we can, in public health, we're supposed to prevent problems to the extent that we can, and this has some elements in there. So it would involve having the regular reminders to on-site sewage system owners. We'd try to work with partners to ensure regular community education and outreach takes place about things like for clean water, pet waste, fertilizer, and things. So again, if Paula's talking to the folks at Pattison Lake about what's going on there, we might be able to work with whatever. If she's meeting with community groups, we could be part of that and talk about what's necessary to kind of keep things going as well as possible. Provide options so that septic systems owners, wherever they are, with the less complex systems, could be certified to do their own work. One of the things we hear from people is, well, gosh, I have to hire a professional. There's people over in Henderson and Nisqually, they can do their own inspections and turn them in. Why can't I? So this would be, we'd try to expand those programs to make them more readily available for people across the county, again, for the less complex systems. Try to look for resources to have rebates, riser rebates, and other things that are available, and continue to make sure we participate in the, so that's another thing. Sorry, I'm talking about what we want to do in the recommended program. Provide training to communities and groups, and then try to expand our online options for training. Right now, we do a lot of stuff in person. There are some things that we're using that were developed by other counties. We think we could do even more and take that along with our septic park in the back of our property here at Lily Road, use those sorts of things to train more people to monitor and maintain their systems. So that is what we'd be trying to do based on what we've heard. And then there's pollution identification and correction elements. So again, we'd be trying to have resources to do investigations to identify the source of pollution that impairs water quality. And recognizing there's a limit to that. If we won't be able to jump on everything or evaluate things as quickly as we'd like, but at least this would give us resources to work on the highest priority areas, to respond to the biggest community needs, the things that have the greatest potential to impact public health, or the greatest potential gain if we're able to fix them or solve them. And so again, survey high priority areas on a rotating basis. So again, you'd have kind of your regular work, the things that you're planning just to keep a pulse on the areas of greatest concern, but you'd also have capacity to do, special investigations that come up. So again, if another Dobbs Creek comes up, we would be able to get to it fairly quickly and at least see how significant the problem is and start to take action to try to fix it. Maybe that would be lay the groundwork for getting grants and things, but we wouldn't be waiting for 2 or 3 years to basically get started, which is what's happened in the case of Dobbs and some other areas. It's just the nature of grants. Again, help us do a better job of finding failing septic systems, following up on those pumper reports and doing things, finding if there are on-site systems that are failing in areas where we're doing studies, work with people to get that fixed. And then this would also give us, I think I mentioned before, the ability to find out where maybe we need to do special programs or do special work. Maybe we find out there's a stormwater system that's having problems that might help Public Works prioritize areas where they would want to try to find funding to repair systems, as an example, or work with the conservation district to try to develop better animal keeping practices, or do work within a particular area. A lot of times, if we're doing this right, we may find things, as Commissioner Edwards has mentioned, where it's not septic systems, it's something else, and we may not be the right people to actually resolve the problem, but we could work then to identify the proper people. Maybe it's ag, maybe it's ecology, maybe it's someone else, to get things done. And then part of this, kind of the key to this thing actually, is that we'd be developing an annual work plan that says, here's where we're going to go, here's what we're going to do. And then we could be reporting back to community members and you as the board and others to say, here's what we've accomplished, here's what we think we need to do next. We've now, maybe we've investigated an area, found that there's something of concern. Now we're going to do even more of a focus the coming year. And since it's been kind of a topic that's come up, we could just use this as an example about, in the case of Black Lake, if we were to have this program and decided that Black Lake was a priority, how it might look. And so you might, if you were to read the report, and what some of the community members have said is that there's 3 stations or 3 areas around the lake that the consultant has identified as being priorities. And so these are the 3 sites, 3, 5, and 11, and those are the areas that are there. And so, if we were to go and had pick resources, here's what it would look like. And Jane helped prepare this slide, sorry, I'm mumbling, but it involves quite a few steps. And and if you were to go and look at the area that's, I'll go back here. Let's imagine we wanted to go to site 3 here. For those who are familiar with the area, that's a large community. It's the Salmon Shores area, and there's also a lot of single-family homes on the shoreline. There's some streams and drainages that come through, and the site 3 is where one is coming between 2 properties that are served by septic systems. So there's lots of complicating factors there. So if we were to go and try to investigate that area or work on a pollution identification control based program in that area, we'd be, choosing the project site. So in this case, the consultant has identified an area. We'd want to look at defining the probable and possible sources. So again, if it's all septic systems, you might design the study one way. If there's a concern, as folks have mentioned earlier, that there might be multiple sources or contributing sources, figure out a way to differentiate that. So that's part of your study design. That's some of the parameters that you're going to pick or what you're going to monitor for. So then you do a preliminary design of the study and the study design. Then you have to notify the community and work with them to let them know what's going on. So if they see something that might be helpful to us, if they were wondering why there are people with orange vests driving around in white cars grabbing samples, they'll understand why. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, did you know that over here there was this problem?" Maybe that's contributing to it. There's lots of information that does. In the old days, we would meet in person with people. We can now try to figure out other ways to do that. But anyways, we want to engage the community, let them know what's going on, try to get their support, let them know about the problem. People have said before that, if people know there's an issue, then sometimes they'll be more willing to help and deal with things. And we found that quite a bit, actually. Is the Summit Lake. At first people were concerned, but as we had water quality information that helped show there were problems, same with Henderson, same with Nisqually, people then were willing to work to identify issues. And when we were able to show that we align our actions with the problems that were found, they were well received mostly. Not everybody, but at least a lot of folks did. And then again, following up, trying to identify where hotspots might be, looking at our records. There's again a lot of steps, and we need to get permission if we're going on private property too. There's a lot of things we can do in stream beds, along road ditches. But if we're going to go between properties or try to get permission to see, what's going on in the backyard, then we need to get permission. Then based on the model we're using in Green Cove, we follow that up with a customized set of recommendations. It might be septic system stuff. It might be referrals to other people. If something bad's going on, we'll issue a notice of violation and require correction. So again, that's the purpose of this, but again, trying to work with people to identify the problems. And what we found is that when you are able to show someone exactly what's going on and why it's a problem, that the behavior or their willingness to spend money or take action or to clean something up increases greatly. So that's takes time to build that rapport and work with people to do it, but it's been successful. And then follow up with that and say, okay, how are we doing? Provide information to the community so they can see what's going on. They can see whether or not we've been successful and whether or not their actions contributed to success. So that's an example of what this could look like. And kind of matching this up again, I wasn't able to make like really bright check marks and shady ones or whatnot, but I think it does a pretty good job of checking off a lot of those things that we talked about before. It wouldn't solve all the systems problems of all the shoreline systems, but at least within focus areas it would get that. We'd follow up on reports. Won't read this to you again, but I think the intent is that it would be able to check at least a lot of the boxes of the things we were concerned about. And the other thing is, and I think it's important, is when you're doing PIC-based work where you've got a water quality problem and the public understands that, and now your actions are aligned with correcting that, that tends to be an understandable model that people accept a little bit more, as opposed to, well, now everybody needs to do this and we don't know if there's a problem there or not, but we want you to take this action. That would be some of the resistance we've seen on some of the septic system stuff, is that, well, how do I know I have a problem? This is a PIC-based approach for a lot of this, is that there's a problem, hopefully the problem's understood, and now we're taking action and we're doing investigations to see if we can fix it or define it better and fix it. So that's the premise there.
Doesn't the shellfish protection districts, though, kind of disprove that?
Excuse me?
Well, with shellfish protection districts, you're doing exactly what you just said. You're basically saying we're gonna implement this and have everybody take these actions, and then there's been, what, as I understand it, extreme success in reopening.
It's been really good success, and I think part of the reason when we were doing that, there was a shellfish downgrade, so there was a problem to kind of rally around. And there had been work that was done by that stakeholder group that I've referenced before that looked at the different problems, and they said, okay, let's figure out what's contributing to the shellfish downgrade. And one of the things they identified was septic systems. They also identified stormwater. They also identified animal keeping practices. They also, I think there's a couple of other things. And so then the work program that was developed worked on all three of those things. So in addition to the septic system stuff, there was stuff done on stormwater and all that. But I think one of the big reasons that ended up being successful is there was a kind of a clearly defined problem. And there was a downgrade and the county had to do something, and there were costs. And people could see that there was something to fix. And so that's, I think that contributed to the success, and Jane and Steve might think otherwise, but I think that was part of it. There was, I kind of referred to it, there was someone who was wearing the black hat, and in that case, it was the Department of Health.
Okay, keep going, sorry.
So just the cost of those things, the way we laid out those programs, these are estimates that I prepared. But you can see that doing the education and outreach as we've outlined it, and there's more details in the sheets I put in your briefing packets, or we put in your briefing packets, but they range, from 220 something thousand a year to 546. The recommended program is a little bit less than the full meal deal shoreline program, but it's that's an estimate. And these things are a bit scalable. You put more resources in them, you can do them faster, you can do more. We could also scale it back, but they could also be reblended if you wanted to. There could be a shoreline program that also has a bigger PIC component. I didn't work that one up, but it's there's another option. There's almost a myriad of options, but we tried to come up with one, the three kind of main components, and one recommendation, because it's always easier to, at least to me, it's like if someone's got a proposal out there, it's better to work from that than to just be picking things out of the sky. So hopefully that's helpful. And then folks asked a little bit, I think previously, about stormwater rates and charges. And so if you look at the ordinance and you look at the Thurston County Code, it says that the rates and charges are for implementing the stormwater utility and acquire, develop, maintain, use, finance, and whatnot, the stormwater facilities. And then they talk about protecting and promoting public health and safety and welfare and minimizing water quality. And so it seems to me that a program that monitors water quality that could be impaired by stormwater facilities and things would certainly be, sorry about that, my phone was ringing, that using stormwater fees for some of those monitoring activities would be appropriate. And in fact, right now today, that's what's paying for our ambient program that Jane has briefed you about before, that we're doing the lake and stream monitoring. We're kind of the monthly sampling that takes place in a lot of areas. And so, the other thing that was asked about was our septic system time of transfer program. And so that program, the short answer is that the fees that are collected there are going to basically pay for the staffing, to pay for the upkeep of our different data systems, our share of Amanda, all that sort of stuff, and the education, and not the education, but the overhead, indirect costs and whatnot. And the fees are collected based on authority in the State Board of Health, or actually RCW 7005-060 paragraph 7. Not that I remember that, but it talks about how those fees need to be collected and for particular services. And so I don't know that, if I didn't get a chance to talk to Jane Futterman because she's on vacation about this, but I think that's a fairly strict authority, or limited authority. In other words, I can't take food program revenue and pay for on-site stuff. It's if I'm asking someone to pay for a service, it needs the activities need to be more related to that. So I think there would be some questions about using that revenue from time of transfer fees for monitoring. But again, I'm not the legal authority. If we wanted to pursue that further, I would suggest we talk to Jane Futterman, who's our expert. And so this is kind of the end of it. And the question is, where do we want to go here? What questions do you have? Be happy to try to answer them. And
great. We got 30 minutes left. I'll start with Commissioner Edwards. Any questions from that piece?
Couple of things here. Art, on your time and transfer, how many of those do we do every year? Just roughly.
A couple thousand.
And do we keep that on some kind of in some kind of an information process so that we're able to refer back? Well, that was inspected, 2 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever it is during a time and transfer. Do we keep that information readily available?
All that information is in our permit tracking system, Amanda, which is the one that the county we're hoping to replace. But Steve and Jane can tell you great details about that if you would like.
Okay, no, I just wonder if that information is there that might help us monitor when septics were last inspected or what. One of my concerns is the 3-year business. I don't know where that date in time came up with, but I know a lot of people that have had systems 20, 30, 40 years old that are functioning fine. And I've been told by some of the septic folks that the little enzymes and such that are, doing their thing in the septic tank, if we pump them out every 3 years, that ends up being detrimental to the overall function of that particular system. Now, on the other hand, if you're dumping toxic chemicals and stuff, then it is appropriate to get that stuff out of there and get the normal bad stuff in there. So can you address how that 3-year thing came about and if there is any leeway there?
Excuse me. Yes. So the 3-year thing came out of state law. And so if you look at the state WAC, it says that on-site systems, actually need to be inspected at least every 3 years, and those are gravity systems and less complex ones. And what we always say, though, is, well, it's a good idea to inspect them regularly. If you're inspecting them properly, you can determine how much sludge and scum are in the tank, and you should only pump it when it's necessary, because you don't want to waste money. And there is, I think, some value once things are working properly. You don't need to pump it out all the time, every time. So I think, but where that came from is state law. My understanding is that the new draft of state law would be a little bit more lenient than the current version is, but we'll see what happens.
Could we actually look into that, the new state law? I guess I didn't know there was a change in it, but maybe you could let us know on that. And then I think we ought to promote the when is necessary portion of it, because I think it's too many people don't understand that. They think they're obligated to pump every 3 years. So just a point of interest there. But anyway, thank you.
No, thank you.
Commissioner Mejia?
Yes, I want to go back to the slides in regards to Black Lake. And kind of like that recommendation, the slide wasn't included on here, but in our packet. But it was in regards to the possible scenarios. And so I want to touch on that. And the plan looks good, but I mean, how would it be implemented? What would be the cost? Because for me right now, the priority is Black Lake. Those people are coming in, they're frustrated. And so can we touch on, the cost of, let's say, implementing, an emergency plan for Black Lake? And how can it get started, and how can we start working with them?
So I didn't budget exactly what just Black Lake would be, but to do this is that the slide, I think, that talked about this pick scenario. I believe we were thinking of Black Lake, and so it would entail a lot of the same stuff, and it would take, right now today, we don't really have the staff to jump in to do that. The staff, I think I mentioned before, we're in the process of rehiring 2 new staff, and the other ones that do our pick and on-site maintenance stuff are really busy and have kind of obligations that we're under contract for. And in a couple of cases, we're behind on our contracts because of that. So to jump in, if we had funding, we could start to plan for that next year. It would take, a couple of people, at least a chunk of time for a couple of people to start doing that, as well as working with that. I don't know what portion of FTEs it would take. We didn't get to that level of detail in working scenarios. I'm sorry.
I would say that right now, with the current funding that we have and the current staffing, we're able to be very active on two sites at a time, with a couple sort of at the tail end or just starting up. So you have to go out with the water quality monitoring first to help narrow down where that hot spot is, so that then that's where you put a lot of time and effort into focusing one-on-one with the individuals in that smaller area. So the water quality sampling goes out first, narrows that down, and then once you have that, they can move on to another area, and the folks who are going to work with the individuals come in after them, so we can kind of stair step it that way. I don't know if that helps.
So from that review, I mean, at this point, we can't even notify communities, that are on those specific streams that, hey, just a heads up, your septic might be failing, you need to check it.
So if it was the desire of the board for us to go and try to come up with just a mailing, we could try to do that. But as far as actually doing the investigation and trying to come up with identify the sources or verify if there is a problem and then verify the sources of the problem, that's a more intensive effort. But if the idea was, okay, let's send a mailing and remind people that their systems haven't been properly monitored, or that they need to monitor and maintain their systems, that's certainly more manageable. I don't know exactly when we would try to, if we could fit that in right now or not. But that's a more manageable task, certainly.
Ty, I can't see who's up next or what. Am I okay to say something?
Go ahead. And then I'll follow up.
Art, on that follow-up with Commissioner Mejia, I'm kind of with her on that request. What I'm wondering about, first of all, if you looked at GIS or something and pulled up the different property numbers for those affected areas that have been identified by the community out there through their study that they paid for, I can't imagine that we wouldn't be able to at least do some kind of a mailing with a notification letter that, hey, this study was done. Looks like we got some problems here, that type of thing. And I can't imagine that we don't have a staff person that could take a day and go out there with their orange vest on, says health department or whatever, and kind of up and down that particular, those three very limited areas, and just make the community might notice and be talking about it, or post a sign, and if you've got questions, call such and such. So I'm kind of with Commissioner Mejia on that I believe it is a bit of a priority to do something. Those folks, I mean, they did something, and now they're asking us to do something, and I don't know why we can't do something. So can we do something?
So just to give you a little bit of a highlight here, though, that it is a pretty complex issue to sort out properly. This is actually I made this one this morning, so it's not in your packet, but this shows the area Station 3, which is one of the priority stations, that has there's a little stream that comes right through here. If I could blow this up, but this is the neighborhood that's behind it. And so who knows what all is draining into this stream, and if that's in fact the biggest source of pollution that's in this monitoring area. But that's the sort of thing you have to, I guess, the mare's nest you have to untangle to figure things out. So maybe we get lucky and we would look and find out that if there's surfacing sewage right next to the stream in this house. I don't think we'll find that, but and we could look at monitoring and maintenance reports and do other things to evaluate it. But that's the thing that you would need to sort through if you're doing trying to figure out what's coming out of that pipe, if in fact, or that stream, in fact, if there is something. So that's just to give you an idea. So, if this, depending upon the stormwater system design, it may be that something up here is making its way down there. It may be animal keeping practices. Maybe we'll find out that someone's got a kennel that has issues, but we don't know. But it's a fairly significant effort to look through this and then try to arrive at conclusions. Again, unless you just get lucky, and I don't. I've actually worked in this area before. It was pretty difficult to sort through. That's just to let you know. But the problem we've got is to get to why we can't do something now is we've got the folks who are best equipped to do this work are the same ones who are working on Dobbs and Green Cove Creek and things that are also priorities that also have water quality problems that we're also under contract for. So that's the problem is if we jump to this, that means we're leaving something else undone or we're delaying something else. And plus, I don't have, we would need to find a funding source for it as well.
Yeah, the funding source is as far as sending out a letter, like that you're right, that would be a fairly straightforward thing to do. But even to spend a day or two of staff time to figure out who's behind and getting their inspections done and all that stuff, I don't think it's legal to use the funding that Henderson and Nisqually people are paying to do that. That's who's paying for our septic staff. And I can't use the shellfish grant to pay for this because it's not a shellfish area. So I don't have a pool of money that's for problems that come up like this. I have grant and very specific funding tied to specific geographic areas that I don't think that I could legally steal from to give to somebody else.
Okay, Art, my turn. So looking at your three sort of menu items, as you say, the PIC piece, I understand, you've been advocating for that, I understand how it works and what it would do, so I don't have any questions there. My questions, I guess, are on the other two pieces. So on education and outreach, my question there is, my understanding of like the kind of history is that when the septic management plan was funded, and then the funding was rescinded, the focus was, well, let's try a couple of years worth of education and outreach. Maybe not quite as expansive as what you're proposing, but the same activities. And then the result of that was that we were not satisfied with the result we got out of that. We got like a 10% uptick in people doing their state required inspection, and that's it. So I'm curious as to why we would double down on that failed approach and invest another $228,000 to expand the same activities that weren't working, which is what spurred this whole series of discussions is my estimation. So that's my comment or / question on the education. On the shoreline piece, you know, looking at your memo that you provided in the packet, you went through pros and cons, and the only two cons, this is not one of your slides, it's in the memo that you provided in the board's packet.
Mm-hmm.
The only two cons identified are some may not see the need and it may seem unfair depending on how it's, how it's paid for. So I assume your memo that you spent time putting together, you would put your best arguments forward. And if the only two arguments are, it might not seem like fair to the public, I don't see anything in here that says it's not a good, effective policy. So if these are the best two arguments, they're not persuasive to me. That these elements of the shoreline, whether it's scaled back to lakes, as Paul has suggested, you were talking about needing a clear problem, like I was, saying about the shellfish district. Well, we have a clear problem. If we look at our lakes, we have toxic algae blooms all over the place. We have swimming beach closures. I think we have the problem that the public is well aware of to focus the attention on, the high priority, so to speak, area. And maybe it's the lakes with the greatest density of septics around them. Maybe that's what if we want to start small, so to speak, not go with 5,000, go with lesser. Maybe we start with those few lakes that have the highest density. But the problem is the algae and the water quality and the approach of spending $228,000 to just do the same activities that weren't working in the focus areas. I don't feel like that's a good investment necessarily. I want to try a new approach. I want to try something new because I don't feel like what we've done has worked very well. It's not your fault or anyone's fault. It hasn't been funded. The activities haven't been funded. So that's a problem for the board. But I want to know what we should be funding. And if the only reason not to fund the shoreline elements that you've outlined is because some may not see the need for it. Well, some people don't see the need for anything. Some people don't see the need to wear a seatbelt. Some people don't see the need to send their kids to school. So I need a better argument than that. I need to know why you don't think that it would be effective from a policy perspective to implement the shoreline elements. And if it's just money we're talking about, well, that's the board's problem. I want to know what you think will be the most effective to get us to our goals. Because like on your slide, when you say what will it accomplish, slide 12, the number 2 there says increased number of on-site septic with current inspection. And I guess my question is how is the recommended program going to do that? I think the education style approach has failed, and PIC doesn't do anything. Funding PIC is great, but it doesn't do anything to necessarily increase the number of septics with inspections, and the education has not created a check mark there from my perspective. So And that's what I'm worrying about. So I know that's a lot, but those are my reactions to the,
Can I get a clarification question? Are you looking at the shoreline OSS or at the recommended program?
when I'm talking about the shoreline OSS, he goes one by one. There's page 1 is a summary of shoreline. Page 2 is a summary of PIC.
Yes.
Page 3 is a summary of education. The recommended program seems to take PIC and education and exclude the shoreline pieces. And I'm wondering why. And I'm looking at the pros and cons that are addressed on page 1. And the only cons are that it may not look, some people may not see the need, but that doesn't tell me that it's not an effective set of policies. It's not. I'm not an expert in this area, as I've said many times. I want to fund the most effective pieces of policy that will help water quality in lakes in our county.
Okay. So do you want me to respond to that?
Please.
Yeah, so just as far as the peer education approach, that I agree that, and our information shows that even though we spent quite a bit of time and effort working in ELD and a couple of other focus areas, that by itself doesn't move the needle far by itself. And so we put that together as an option, but I don't think it would be my preferred option to do just by itself as far as trying to be effective. It certainly helps build community rapport and do some other things. But as far as, getting people to monitor and maintain it by their systems just on its own, that probably isn't the way to do it. The reason we do think, though, that incorporating it into pollution identification work or the recommended program is that it's something that people ask for. So, and it also doing the education that allows people to do their own self-certification, that reduces one barrier. They're not having to hire a professional to do that. And so that, again, we've had great success in Henderson and Nisqually. So I think that helps move the needle a little bit on its own, just because now people have an option that they didn't have before. And I think also what we found is that when, and this has been my experience, when you start doing investigations in areas and people are worried that their septic system might be a problem, a lot of them suddenly inspect the systems and have them evaluated, and they do maintenance because if there's a problem there, they want to find out about it. If there's a problem, they want to fix it. And it kind of spurs action. So I think at least geographically, when you implement a program like this, you see that there's more interest, there's more people doing things to evaluate things. They might, dig around and see, where is that septic tank that I haven't looked at for 20 years? So I think we do see some of that, and I don't have the data with me right in front, but when we've implemented the Henderson program at first, now we're starting to do shoreline surveys and we're doing eye tracing and stuff. There was a bit of a spike in activity that went on there as far as monitoring and maintenance and finding problems. So I think it does help some that way, but it isn't the same. It isn't the same as if you require a renewable certificate for a system and you're tracking that and whatnot. So I think I can't argue with you on that. To get the best, have the highest return as far as assuring that systems are being inspected and maintained, a program that involves that is more likely to do it. And there isn't, I understated, I think, in the slide. People may not think it's fair. I think what we found is that when people don't think there's a need for a program, then when you have a hearing to implement a program or when you have a public meeting, then you see them. And so the slides I showed a bit ago, or a few meetings ago with the crowded meetings and the newspaper headlines, and that's what I was getting at, is that if people don't think it's fair, if they don't like it, then they're going to appeal to their policymakers to say that it isn't right. So that's the thing that I was trying to bring to your attention. I understated in the slides, but I think there's also a question there of, if the board or it's a decision that we really want to go forward with this, so it's a matter of how to do it, not if we're going to do it, then that might change the dynamics too. We found that in the past, but I think when people are think that there's the decision is yet to be made and they want one decision over the other, then they show up and septic systems it's, that combination of property rights and costs that gets people's attention, and they show up at meetings when that topic comes up almost inevitably. So that's what I guess my reply to that. The shoreline, doing a shoreline program, focusing on that, I think we would have great success for it. We know how to do that. It's just a matter of if we have limited resources and the things that we thought we heard as far as what the board was interested in, there are some other options. So we presented that combination of things, but certainly it's your choice. And if the board were to decide we really want to focus on shoreline systems, then maybe without the PIC or do shoreline with PIC, we design something to do that too. That would be a great combination as well.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think that, I totally understand the concept of, public support and understanding. I guess I'm feeling like what I'm guessing, and Commissioner Edwards was here, he probably knows it better than I do, what was the board heard, but the fees schedule, I'm imagining was a highly controversial element. In terms of the fact that it seems to me like what you're laying out under this shoreline piece isn't requiring people to do anything that state law doesn't already say they need to do, in a sense. How you fund it is obviously important consideration for the board. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say, I should remind or say too, though, is one of the big comments we heard during the on-site management plan stuff years ago is that a lot of the folks who were most concerned were the rural property owners who were going to have to pay fees and maybe do stuff that they didn't think was necessary. I think the shoreline property owners I remember the meeting we had out on Steam at Griffin School. We talked about stuff they seemed to think it was understandable and made more sense out there. It was one of the strange meetings. They applauded when we were done. So that was more, I think that's more supportive in those shoreline areas. So I don't mean to overstate that people might be upset if it's tailored to the shoreline stuff.
Okay, 5 minutes and to our allotted time, we can go over a little bit, but anybody have a final
So what I'm hearing is, and I hear this from Commissioner Mejia and Commissioner Edwards, is, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
No, can you hear, Art, can you hear me okay?
I can sort of hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna try to speak louder. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, and I'm going to crank up the volume on my computer here.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, at least Commissioner Mejia, Commissioner Edwards would like to see a proposal from you as to how we're going to be addressing the comments on Black Lake. Not only what Jane stated, obviously we cannot take money from other programs to do the work what the citizens from Black Lake have requested. So I think that's probably what.
I have another comment. Because I do understand the funding side of things, and I understand we can't take from other grants. Being that this is kind of, a public health situation, is there a way that we can look at funding, Ramiro?
Well, we need to understand the cost, and then the next question will be where the money will come from.
Okay.
Because the funding is going to be a decision the board needs to make. And if there is no, and that's what I was leading to, because Jane made a good point. Because we cannot take money from other programs to address the issues of Black Lake. Then the board's decision will be where the money is going to come from. And most likely has to come from the general fund. And that conversation needs to happen, but we need to understand what the cost is. And I think the scale down of the activities that you have on the shoreline option related to Black Lake, I believe that's something the board might be interested in seeing what that is in terms of dollars and cents.
Hey.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Ty when I can get in there. That's all.
You're up, Commissioner.
I wonder if there isn't a way. I think Jane said something about a potential, although it'd have to go by legal. In that stormwater ordinance, it sounds like there is a way to take something from stormwater and fund what Commissioner Mejia is talking about under that clause where some of that looks like it's runoff that is contributing to that Black Lake problem. I don't know, maybe it's a stretch, but what's wrong with giving a little stretch to get just something going to see if we can get to the bottom of it? And the other piece of that is the chair referred to toxic algae blooms with septic problems. And Art, is there a study out that has identified that toxic algae blooms are the responsibility of septic systems?
I'll maybe defer to Paula and Jane because they're the experts on this, but it's the issues with the direct relationship between septic and, well, it's the nutrient issues, I think, are what contribute to the toxic algae blooms. So whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus, and septic systems can be a contributor for that. So they're part of the problem, or they can be part of the problem if they're adding nutrients. So I think that's probably the best answer I can give. It could be storm, like it could be the other things you mentioned before, storm stuff. It could be lawns. It could be pets. It could be lots of different things that add nitrogen and phosphorus to the lakes.
Okay, thanks.
So one more question, and then we'll try to summarize and wrap this up. So my question, Art, is on your funding slide, when you have the on OSS shoreline piece costed out at $546,000.
Okay.
Would that be, is that cost based on addressing the 5,000 parcels or whatever? And could there be, if we were just focused on, say, the half dozen lakes with the highest density of septics, would that be a then smaller number than 546,000?
What this was intended to do is to have kind of start the process for a rolling program, recognizing that it takes a little bit more time to gear up than that. So if we wanted to, I mean, we could scale it back a little bit, but one of those things when you're doing it, you need quite a bit of administrative support. You typically need a couple of staff to do that. There's quite a bit of lab money that's involved with it too, because you're doing, but it'd probably be reduced a little bit. We designed it, or the way it was priced was for the staffing and the lab resources that were identified there.
So just to kind of wrap this up, and I know it's 12 o'clock, we've put I think it's been stated, you guys know that I think I put a placeholder in the budget discussion for some element, some blend of what, as you've said, there's different ways to blend these elements. Whatever blend the board can come to agreement on, I'm going to see if we can come up with the funding for it during our budget discussion. I don't know if we can, but I guess I'm going to be looking at trying to incorporate as many elements of the shoreline piece as possible based on what I heard from Paula and what I've seen from the, from all the presentations you guys have given, because I think there'd be a high effectiveness rate to some of those elements. Maybe not all the elements right now, whatever we can afford. PIC is a great way to have, to have that beefed up. So I'd like to see that as part of it. The board obviously will have to look at the resources available and debate the elements. But I guess that's where I'm just signaling to my seatmates, that's where I'm kind of headed, is to try to incorporate money for PIC and money for as many of the shoreline pieces as we think we can manage with available resources. And it's my understanding we'll just have to take that up in the budget discussion at this point.
Yeah,
we kind of know, this has been a great summary of kind of what elements we can talk about and what they would mean if we did that.
Yeah, and it has to be part of the budget process, whether the Black Lake can use general fund or stormwater fees, but that allocation needs to be part of the general fund. There's no ways and means and methods that we can just allocate expenditures of those funds next week. I think we need to be mindful of the process in terms of budget. So, and what I have also is related to the budget conversation, again, is to come up with a proposal as to what is it that we're going to do to Black Lake, because I understand and I've heard that's a priority for the board, to see what that cost is gonna entail. And then we'll have a conversation where the money is gonna come from, whether stormwater fees, general fund, or other means. But also what I've heard from, also from Commissioner Mensah is what it will take, also how much it will cost to get, to implement the shoreline to the most high-density lakes that we have in the county. It's somewhat of a tier approach. We already have the overall shoreline, 546,000. But if we were to concentrate on the lakes with the high density, what will that cost be? And I understand what you stated, our administrative components and everything else. So globalizing the cost on those two might give a perspective in terms of the board to see the funding on a tier approach.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. And I'm just listening to what I'm hearing and, based on the kind of lake-specific issue that Paula described up front, I think that that's maybe, I'd love to be able to do this for all of our shoreline septics, but, if we can just kind of, if we can start small and show some success, then we can build on that. So I think that's a good approach. Anything else from the board before we adjourn?
Nope, sounds good.
Thank you, guys. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.